Weekend Breakfast on 702 with me, Gugs and Mhlungu. As always on a Saturday, we look at the future of, and this week we're looking at the future of home ownership and whether it is still worth trying to sell your home. Some reports are saying that cash-strapped owners in the country who are considering putting their houses up for sale are often shocked to discover that the average expenses relating to selling a house can be quite high. And so now there are difficulties around selling your home. Of course, there are difficulties keeping your home because of the successive interest rate hikes we've seen over the last little while. So what is the future of home ownership in South Africa? And maybe you are a homeowner trying to sell your home. Give us a call on 011-883-0702. Send us an SMS on 31702 and your WhatsApps on 0727021702. Joined on the line by entrepreneur and the CEO of MortgageMarket.co.za. Tim Akinnusi joins us on the line. Tim, a very good morning to you this morning.
Good morning, Gugs, and good morning to your listeners.
Thank you so much for your time. So we've seen some reports. South Africans can't afford to sell their homes because of high costs. Is that what is currently happening in some instances where there are very high costs associated with selling a home, making it very difficult for homeowners to do so? Tell us about that.
Yeah, Gugs, I think that could be related to a particular grouping of homeowners that are either unable to keep up with their current repayments and either need to downscale or find a way of accessing whatever liquidity they have in those homes to be able to pay off other debts that they may be carrying. As you mentioned earlier, that we are in probably at the peak of a very high rate cycle in the context of where it was during the COVID years. So I don't think there's a kind of like a cash on, expense that they have to bear when they are selling their houses, because in majority of cases, if not all cases, it's the buyers that actually pay for the transfer cost and the, transfer duties. Mm-hmm. But on the seller's part, it's related to things like them not having kept up with their rates repayments and their levies. So now, in order for them to transact and actually sell that house, they need to settle those outstanding arrears before the transaction can go through. Mm-hmm. So that's what becomes very costly for the seller. That find themselves in a position where they are unable to sell the place if they can't recover those costs.
And I see there's also costs for compliance certificates and bond cancellation.
Yes, and some of those costs can be dealt with. In the case of the bond cancellation, I mean, if you know that you're going to sell your place well ahead of time, you can notify your bank to say that you are going to be selling, and they will then prep bond cancellation fees. And in many cases, they also waive those fees as well. So it's not a cost that's insurmountable. And in the case of having to pay for electricity clearance certificates, those are the costs that come alongside the transaction, when you want to sell. Again, it's not a terribly big cost. I think the main cost involved is when you're unable to get that certificate because your house has not been kept in good standing order and the electrician needs to make certain repairs to, obviously provide you with a clearance certificate, mm-hmm. Then I think it starts to become costly because there is a cost to bear in terms of those repairs, but not necessarily the certificate itself.
Uh-huh. Yeah. And then the other challenge appears to be that sometimes home sellers or homeowner who's put their house up for sale are hoping that it will be quick and hoping, I guess, to then get the money from the sale quickly. But sometimes that doesn't seem to be the case. In some instances, it can take many months, sometimes up to a year or more for the sale to happen, and then for the sale and transfer ownership to then happen at the deeds office. And that seems to be another one of the factors that seems to be putting pressure on homeowners and their cash flow.
Yeah, so if I can maybe just, all of these situations, they're very situational, all right? So in the event that it's an estate that has been transferred because it's a deceased estate, so it becomes a little bit more complex because you have to wind up that estate and then still try to then execute the transaction of selling the place as part of the winding up of the overall estate. So that could take time. But typically, if the municipality and the council if there are no backlogs and they're able to execute the transaction and you get your rates clearance certificate from them fairly early, then it should take the typical 2 to 3 months to transact. Beyond that, it's typically in very specific instances where it's not a straightforward transaction. That's when those delays happen, right? And of course, that puts more pressure on the seller, who now has to sit with the ongoing cost of repaying their bond still, maintaining the place, etc. And if they've already been in a very distressed situation, then obviously that can be exacerbated when you add time to that. But again, there are other ways of mitigating those risks, such as taking out a bridge and finance. It's a solution that we offer where we could effectively bridge you through that period, provided that the transaction is still legitimate and proceeding.
So in terms of, based on, what you see through your work with MortgageMarket, we often hear that when the economy is in this particular state, it is a buyer's market. Is that correct? Was that a correct characterization?
Yes, I would say right now it is a buyer's market, and say the more affluent to mid-market, and people who are looking to acquire property from sellers that are selling their second homes, right? So investment property. Those tend to be very, the word is not to say easy to acquire, but there's a lot of predatory pricing there because they know that people are potentially desperate to release that house. So they would, those buyers will likely offer 10 to 20% less than the going rate, because they know that the sellers can't afford to hang on to it for much longer. But certainly, there's that old saying, in the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is king. It literally means that in this instance, there are very few buyers out there. So any half-decent buyer, can really negotiate hard to acquire property at less than its current market value. So that's what we're seeing. However, in the affordable housing segment, I should say, there's a lot of buyers out there. There's a lot of resiliency in that market because you're purchasing property at between 500 to 750K. There's not much room to play with. So those prices tend to be a lot less flexible. And typically the challenge there is that buyers, their affordability is just constrained because of the interest rate cycle, or their credit is constrained because they have missed payments on other credit obligations. So then the banks are unlikely to support the financing of that. So that's where the market is right now, a very, very much a buyer's market, but also quite a stagnant market in terms of the volume of deals out in the market.
So it sounds as though if you are looking or in the market for property, you do have a few more options and a bit more leverage. If you are then trying to sell, it's going to be a little bit tougher for you in this current climate.
100%, yeah, because the supply is far exceeds the demand out there. So you are now competing with a lot of stock out there, and if depending on how desperate the sellers are, they may be willing to take less money on their property in comparison to yours. So if you are a seller out there that can afford to keep your place, rather not put it on the market until the market improves, until there's more buyers available. But right now, it's one where if a seller desperately has to sell, if they have a bond over their property, they can actually reach out to their banks as well and, ask for better terms in terms of how they sell their property, because you don't want to sell your property with a distress factor in it, because that's where potential buyers out there, if they notice that you are in a desperate situation, they're more likely to make an offer, but not a good offer. one that will be far less than what you are asking. So you want to almost stay away from that. Otherwise, effectively, you would not be getting full value for your place. And that might leave you with a sense of regret that you had actually even gotten into the transaction years ago when you purchased the place. So, that's the advice that I would give in the short term.
Yeah, and also just something you mentioned at the beginning as well, just if you are then going to look to sell in this climate, ensure that you are up to date with the upkeep of your house and any other sort of liabilities, expenses relating to your house, so that you have fewer, these costs that are associated with selling when you finally then try and sell your property.
Absolutely, yeah. And the other thing to say is that, property is obviously a long-term purchase. In the long run, you should always be a winner in terms of house price appreciation and the fact that you would have paid down this thing over a number of years. So there should be some level of liquidity you should realize and proceeds that you should realize in selling. And you don't want those proceeds to be wiped out by the cost of paying up your rates and taxes or paying up your levies, etc. Because often those are critical, pieces of the transaction that will hold up you not being able to sell your place. And the last thing you want is for those costs to wipe out the gains that you've made over the years.
Tim, thank you so much for making time for us this morning and joining us on the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much. That is Tim Akinnusi, the CEO of MortgageMarket.co.za and entrepreneur, joining us for our Future of conversation. Coming up, we end the show in the Literature Corner. A new book looking at rapper AKA and Anele Tembe's relationship has stirred some controversy, even getting a statement from the Forbes family, which is AKA's family. We'll speak to the author. They are a veteran journalist, publisher. Melinda Ferguson will join us to speak about her new book called When Love Kills.